This study is entitled The Doctrine of a Man's Covenant. And as we proceed, it's kind of ironic with regard to the devotion that we just had, because this particular study, I'm going to talk about why we should be trustworthy. And of course, we all understand that as far as putting a total trust in man is something that is an unwise move. On the other hand, if I can't trust you and you can't trust me, then there's no sense in us being here. We might as well go out in the world with the rest of the untrue and unkind folks that gravitate out there. So when we're talking about trustworthiness, Jesus Christ as a human being was trustworthy. If he gave his word, he kept his word, and that's what this is all about. When we're talking about a man's covenant. And we're going to zero in on, eventually, the local church and people joining the local church and so forth. Because I think it's needed, for one, we need to be reminded of these things, of a word that we have given with regard to obligations here. Attendance, giving, support, fellowship, and the like, inviting others. And the fact that oftentimes we tend to sit back, become a little complacent, a little neglectful, other things and other people take the place, and then we fall behind in our Bible study, and the person that usually gets blamed is the pastor. That's the way it's always been in the past. I'm speaking from a word of testimony here. In verse number 15, the Apostle Paul says, "Brethren, I speak after the manner of men." This is in Galatians 3:15. Now, when he uses the phrase "the manner of men," he's talking about something that is normal and natural, that men do. Men make covenants. Men sign on the bottom line. Men, give their word. There's not a person here that has not bought an automobile and had to ask for a loan that hasn't put your name down there. And what is that? That is your word that you're trustworthy to follow through, see it through, and pay for that. If you get a house or whatever, the signing on the bottom line is a covenant. The striking of the hand, the giving of the word. And so the Apostle Paul is saying it is not unnatural for people in the unsaved world to make covenants. It's just a part of life. As a matter of fact, God built it into the system, and we'll see that in just a few moments. And though it be but a man's covenant. Now, he's recognizing the fact here that men do make covenants. Now, a covenant is only as good as the piece of paper? No. The trustworthiness of the individuals who make it. It doesn't matter what's on that piece of paper. If you are not trustworthy in your heart, then that paper is meaningless, because eventually you'll begin to breach the terms of the contract, whatever it is. Those that have ever loaned money, especially large sums of money, to people that you're just not sure of, find out eventually that you may have been taken because you never get it back. However, society, the business world, usually runs on a man's covenant, where one person trusts another person who has given their word to live up to the conditions and terms as they're stated. Now let's read on. We're not going to look at this part until later on in the study. If it be confirmed, now there's an important part. As long as it is unconfirmed, as long as you don't enter into the agreement, you're not bound. There's nothing says that you have to do it this way if you didn't give your word that you're going to do it this way. However, if there comes a time when your word is given, that changes the complexity of the situation and the issue. This is what you said you would do. Your virtue, your integrity, your honesty is at stake in these things. If it's confirmed, No man disannuls or adds thereto. That's pretty good. Have you ever had somebody after the fact to try to change the conditions? Well, that's what it's saying here. After the fact, legally speaking, you can't say, well, it's in effect one day and void the next. I'll abide by it 1 second and not the next. Or you can't come back without the other parties involved sanctioning it and saying, well, I think we should do it this way. Once it's sanctioned and set in its course, then it takes a vote of those involved to change it. One person can't do it. Now let's turn back to Psalms chapter 15. Psalms chapter 15. We believe that this is how God has set these things in motion. Psalms chapter 15. He has historically wanted, from the days that he created Lucifer and then Adam, for men and angels to give their word and own up to it. We live in a day where integrity is a flippant word. We don't understand what it is by way of the general culture out there, and then not only do we not understand it, but people do not live by integrity. Well, it's a big political issue, but for the most part, who cares? What's done is done. We think that the ballot box is going to change things, and what changes things is money and the sweep of history and the emotions of people, and who's the most handsome and the most popular, not who has a grip on the issues. It's just like this Kennedy fella who died. Or evidently he has died. Dan Rather reported that there were people going with regard to his death, oh, not the gorgeous one. No, not the gorgeous one. Does that mean that all ugly people don't count if they die? I mean, this is ridiculous. What does it matter, not the gorgeous one? It's emotion. They get in on their looks and their popularity and swooning the soccer moms and so forth. It's nonsense. What does God want? God wants, and we're back on virtues again, last part of verse number 4, a person that swears to his own hurt. If I said it, I'm going to carry it out, even if it means that there is some personal discomfort on my part. Now, there's a person of integrity and character. There's a trustworthy person. You could come to the Lord Jesus Christ, and that's what he would do. He told the Father he'd go to the cross, and you know what? Come hell or high water, that's where he was going to be at his appointed time. He swore to it at his own, he swore, I've come to do your will, O God. Your will be done. But today we're living in a society where people do not, and not only do they not want to give their word, but once they do, they don't want to live up to it. He that swears to his own hurt and changes not. He doesn't try to disannul it. He doesn't try to add thereto. He doesn't try to invalidate it. He tries to do his best to adhere to the terms. Let's turn to Leviticus chapter 19. Now, this is a system that is built into the law. Two things with regard to this. Leviticus chapter 19 and verse number 12. And ye shall not swear falsely by my name, neither shall you profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. Okay, there's the negative part of it. If you're going to say something, says God, and you're going to get me involved, then you better have every intention, as much as humanly possible, to carry out what you swore to do. After all, bringing me into it, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God. Bringing me into it changes the complexity in the picture as well. Now, my integrity is at stake. So, you can't perjure yourself, you cannot lie. Don't swear falsely. If you don't intend to do it, You better be upfront and bring about an understanding that you do desire to fulfill. Now that's the negative. Let's go back to Deuteronomy chapter 6. And there are many scriptures like this where God reminds Israel that this is what he wants. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse number 13. Thou shalt fear the Lord thy God and serve him, and shalt swear by his name. In other words, this is something that you ought to do because it shows integrity. As you are going to be accountable eventually for every idle word, says Christ, bringing God into the picture is to strengthen the word that is given. I swear this in God's name because ultimately it's not you that I'm swearing to. I'm going to be accountable to God because breaches in the word, not keeping promises and the like, will find their way in front of God ultimately. Now, let's go to the book of Romans chapter 2. Romans chapter 2. There are two human problems that are fatal. Now, there are more than that, of course, but germane to this study, Romans chapter 2. One is that men are covenant breakers, and the other is that men are truce breakers. Now, we'll see what those two words are in just a little bit. But the reason that we even have to speak on something like this is because even church people, good, in quotes, upstanding church people, sometimes don't understand this of binding themselves with an oath. In a man's world, a man's covenant, you swear. A Christian swears before the Lord as such, that such and such will be carried out. And again, we're going to be addressing things like local church responsibilities and so forth. But in Romans chapter 2, here's the reason. Verse number 14. When the Gentiles which have not the law do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves. Now, Paul is stating a dispensational principle here when the law was not written and the Gentiles lived and so forth. But on the other hand, he is also stating a transdispensational principle that's true about the old sin nature. The old sin nature wants to be a law unto itself. He goes on to say it's not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. Did you ever have a bona fide authority tell you, no, you can't do this, or no, you can't have it, going all the way back to mom and dad? And all of a sudden there was something in you. You knew it was right. You knew you should obey, but you were going to get away with it no matter what. You might get a whipping later, but you were going to finagle somehow to get away with it and oppose their authority and word. Where does that come from in these sweet little ones with faces of cherubs, and so forth? Where does this come from? Well, it's ingrained. It's genetically inherited. It's the old sin nature. And what characterizes it, as we'll see in just a little bit, is disobedience. We want to be a law unto ourselves. We don't want someone telling us what to do. And it doesn't matter across the board. And sometimes that even happens in a local church. People get carnal. People get out of fellowship. And then people come to church and all of a sudden, rules and regulations and the like, we stiffen up and we get a little upset and angry. We're not going to follow it. He's not going to tell me what to do and so forth. And you just wonder, have we learned nothing with regard to what virtue is, character strengths, what integrity is, loyalty to the truth across the board, what obedience is, that is doing the command as is specified. For some reason, we don't do that. Now, the Apostle Paul is going to tell us why God judged the ancient world and why God is going to judge our world and the world in the future. Romans chapter 1, verse 28. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. Now, you see, not keeping your word is not convenient. It's not conventional. It's not the thing to do. If you want somebody to trust in you in the deal, then you've got to be, or excuse me, if you want to trust in someone else and expect them to own up to what they said, then you yourself have to be trustworthy. That's what we're talking about. Being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, and here is our word. Covenant breakers. Asun thetos. Asun thetos means no set terms which bind together, or literally no point of agreement even after the covenant is ratified. You see, that's the whole point. A covenant breaker is one who, the negation, soon means together, thetos, nothing set. Or it is a word actually that when it is set, you don't abide by it. And that's actually what this word means. You have set terms, but you don't abide by them. That's why they translated it a covenant breaker. Folks who do this agree to do one thing, but intend to do another. They're false to their word and consider the agreement simply a scrap of paper. It's meaningless. Oh, yeah, it looks good. Oh, I read it. Well, I don't understand the words here. Yeah, but we've had an understanding. We've been brought to an understanding of the like. Well, yeah, fine. That's good for you. But now wait one second. You want me to abide by it, but you don't intend to abide by it, and yet you gave your word. What is this? And so you begin getting difficulties here. And in eternity future, we're going to come to a state wherein dwelleth righteousness. Now, what does that mean? It means righteousness is going to be the order of the day, the coin of the realm. It's what is going to be set where when one person gives their word, the other person gives their word, it's going to be carried out. Righteousness is doing just that. Otherwise, we become a covenant breaker. And again, sometimes in a local assembly that happens. We join the church, we know the standards, we say we'll own up to them, but we get a little lax in doing what it says. Now, there's another word that Paul uses to describe men, and if we'll come to 2 Timothy chapter 3. 2 Timothy chapter 3. And here the Apostle Paul says, this in particular is going to be something that characterizes men in general as the last days come upon us. Covenant breakers was something God dealt with in the past, and Paul says now in this dispensation we get to look forward not only to this, but also to men being truce breakers. In verse number 1, this know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. Men shall be lovers of their own selves. Why don't they keep their word? Because they give their word, they thinking it's advantageous to them at the time, and yet they find out, this is a raw deal, but you gave your word. And they only think it's a raw deal because they're greedy and selfish, self-centered, and so forth. They're lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection. And this time, instead of asun thetos, the Apostle Paul uses the word spondos. Now, spondos here means no respect for the sacrifice offered to bind an agreement. Now, let's get our next There we go. Let's get the covenant breakers illustration up there. Now we're going to go back to the first word and look at an illustration here. And then we'll go back to the second word. With regard to being a covenant breaker, and these two things again are part and parcel of what we're dealing with today, is that men make agreements that they do not abide by. Now, especially is this bad if the other party is abiding. And see, that makes it worse, because you've really lied in actuality. You've really not done what you said that you would do. So the terms are rejected after the agreement or the covenant is confirmed or made. And the Apostle Paul says that God gets angry at that because he wants all men to live up to what has bound them together in whatever. Whether it's a business, whether it's a nation, whether it's a church. If terms are reached, now before anybody says this, we're heading down one road here and we need to head down another with regard to legalism and a more lenient approach, we're going to cover that with regard to, because this is something I've dealt with since I've been in the ministry, and we're going to look at Paul's statement and see how to deal with these things. But one thing you have to understand, that God says in his word, covenant breakers are not liked. Sometimes there has to be a breach in the covenant. Sometimes the other person doesn't hold up to their end of the bargain. And so therefore you have to work out other arrangements. But if you gave your word and the other person's doing what they said they'd do, then your part is not to break the agreement, especially after it is made. All right, now let's look at the truce breakers covenant and look at the word aspondos. Let's turn to the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, for an illustration of this. Hebrews chapter 10, verse number 29. Now, aspondos means no sacrifice. Now, that's its narrow interpretation. Literally, it's a word that came to be known as no respect for the sacrifice of others with regard to an agreement. It was an ancient ritual. Well, as a matter of fact, if you would go back, and we're not going to do it, back to Genesis chapter 15, God told Abraham to get some cattle and sheep and birds and goats and so forth and split them in half because he was going to make a covenant. Now, for the most part, both men would make a covenant. Both men would make a sacrifice. It's like Abimelech and Abraham. Do you know what Beersheba means? Beersheba means the well of the sevenfold oath, where Abimelech said to Abraham, "Welcome to my land. You can drink of the well for all of the days of your travel here." And Abraham said, "Fine, I'm not going to take more than what you've offered, and I'm going to respect your property. Here I give you 7 sheep." So there was an exchange of sacrifice. There was a compromise. There was an agreement to live in this way and to show a token of their oath. They would give something up, whether the land, as in Abimelech's case, or the sheep, as in Abraham's case. But if somewhere down the road they began to disrespect it as far as their word and break the agreement, aspondos is the word that would come up as far as the Greeks were concerned, meaning you disrespect my sacrifice. I gave up something for your benefit. And the terms were, you would give up something for my benefit. You took of my worth, whatever it was, in the agreement, but you don't want me to take of yours. And there is an inequity there. And so aspondos means to have made a concession, a sacrifice, give a token, shortchange yourself in some way, so as the other person would know that you're going to live by the agreement. And then afterwards, simply laugh at them. Abraham, I got 7 sheep out of the deal. I have no intention of letting Abraham do thus and so. Well, that's the wrong thing. And that's what a truce breaker is. Men living together in conflict make this truce, but instead of laying down their weapons with hostilities, they disrespect the sacrifice of the other person. All right, let's go back to the book of Amos, chapter 3. The book of Amos, chapter 3. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Boy, these minor prophets. Okay, where are we? Here's Amos. Amos 3:3. Okay. Verse number 3 in Amos asks a rhetorical question. Can two walk together? Now, the word walk here is given in its metaphorical sense, like the Apostle Paul talks about our Christian walk. He's not talking about us taking a cross or a banner around town and walking the bus routes or what have you, saying the end of the world is at hand or Jesus saves or what have you. He's not talking about that kind of walk. It is a metaphor for going around and accomplishing something. And the question here is, can two people go around and accomplish something unless they be agreed? And the answer to that is absolutely not. Because you're going to end up having difficulties down the road. Now, every human relationship has minor disagreements, has personal taste and minor personality clashes and so forth. We all understand that. This is still an imperfect world, no matter how much like Christ we want to be. And so that's built into the understanding of this particular study. And that's what the devotion was about. Nobody's perfect, so you can't always trust them completely to follow through and carry out what they say. However, this study is also about doing just that if you give your word, because that's what Christ would have done. We're on virtues now, remember. And the virtue of honesty and integrity states, that's what I said, okay, then that's what I should do. And he swears to his own hurt and doesn't change. Now, again, we will discuss contingencies, alterations to the letter of the law, and so forth. But in actuality, if you give your word, then you must walk with the other person who gave theirs in this understanding. Can two walk together except they be agreed? And the answer is not. Both parties must own up to their specific job and part, otherwise it's all futile. Before long, you'll be walking down the road and you'll be feuding because you come to the fork in the road and you don't know which direction to take. You don't know when you want to stop for lunch. Or you don't know if you want to stop at Hardee's or McDonald's or the ancient world's version of it, the vendors on the side. You know, and so it begins that of bickering. There must be a basic agreement in life between people. Now, you know what? God does this to us. If we want to live in heaven with Him, do you know something? The first thing we've got to do is agree with Him about His Son. He will not let you into His heaven unless you agree with Him that His Son is the cat's meow, His Son is His spitting image, His Son is something worthy to be worshipped and proud of, and you've got to believe in your Son. Those are the terms, or else I'm not going to let you into heaven. Now, if you believe, guess what? You're agreed. And guess what God says? We're going to walk together forever. The closer walk you get is the more you agree with God. That's why you learn Bible doctrine and so forth. And so it's important to understand Two must agree. Now, when I say two, it can be more than two. A group of people, an organization, a nation, a church. There must be a common agreement as to how things are going to be conducted, which direction that you're heading, or else there are troubles. Okay, let's look at the illustration of the unequal yoke. All right, see a typo here. Man, I have worked so hard not to have those. It's not 1 Corinthians 6:14, it's 2 Corinthians. It just grates my soul. Now, we usually use this with regard to marriage. Be ye not, says verse 14, unequally yoked together with unbelievers. It's the principle of the unequal yoke. Now, those of you, as was, again, I don't mean to mention the devotional this morning in the testimony, but it did fall right in line with what we're saying here, at least somewhat. Unless two are agreed as to a partnership, as to whatever, then it's eventually going to fail. The other person is going to let you down. And those of you that have been married to someone who doesn't want to keep up their end of the bargain understands this business of the unequal yoke. You can scream and argue and plead and pray and so forth, but if they're headstrong and going another direction, all there's going to be is strife and heartache and so forth. And that's the unequal yoke, and that's what's being talked about here. Actually, it is, phooey. I'm going to go back. We're just going to go right back here, and we're going to bring up number 3. Let's see where we are. Okay, I hope it lets me run the program from there. Yeah, it's not going to do it. We'll run through these quickly as we talk. See, just let me explain something. I have on here what is called a touchpad. Now I've got a mouse and a touchpad, and my finger tends to get extremely heavy. When I touch the mouse, it's okay, it's 1 click or 2 clicks. When I have the touchpad, I tend to touch too hard, and what I did was advance the slide before I wanted it to advance. Okay, let's see. Okay, we're on this. We'll get through this. The word for unequal yoke is heterozugeo. Yeah, here we are. Heterozugeo means to be bound to one who is dissimilar or who has a different agenda. We understand homosexuality, same sex, heterosexuality, different sex. It's heterozugeo. And so it means a different yoke, a different bond, a different agenda, and so forth. Now, the perfect illustration of this is back in Deuteronomy chapter 22. Deuteronomy chapter 22 and verse number 10. Number 1 will be the ox, and number 2 will be the ass. 22:10 in Deuteronomy, thou shalt not plow with an ox and an ass together. Now, why in God's name wouldn't God allow this? Now, mind you, this is under the dispensation of law. So they got in some big trouble if they had an ox and an ass, and they bound them together and tried to plow the land. Now, what was God trying to illustrate? He was trying to illustrate the unequal yoke. That's what he was trying to illustrate. Number one, the ox is a most faithful work partner. He has one thing on his mind, just getting harnessed up and pulling that thing and doing what his master says. He doesn't usually get stubborn and pull to the left and pull to the right and sit down, takes a sledge or, a 2x to get his attention and so forth. He is there to put his hand to the plow and to make those furrows straight in keeping with what his master wants. So he is bigger, he's taller, he's stronger, he's dedicated. All of a sudden he gets yoked to an ass. You ever been yoked to one? Be kind. Be kind. But you understand what I'm driving at here. And so here's this dedicated ox who's got this shorter, weaker, stubborn, willful, headstrong mule right beside him. And so who has to do more work in this bargain? They're hitched together. It's the ox. He's got to pull double and triple duty because the mule starts dragging his feet, sitting down, going another direction. And that ox has got to pull the load for two. And so that's what God is saying here. And that happens sometimes in life. It happens sometimes in a local church situation where there's a common understanding and folks don't start living up to it, and the yoke begins to get unequal. You vote to do things in a church, but then there are those who don't give, and so in order to pay for it, those who do give have to compensate but double. There are those who are faithful, those who are not. And there's always a compensation with being hitched to one who doesn't intend to pull his share of the load. So in an unequal yoke situation, it's very, very difficult. That's why it was prohibited in the Old Testament, and the Apostle Paul said something about it in the New Testament. When you've got two parties pulling in two different directions, the ox wants to do his master's bidding, the ass wants to go his own way, it becomes difficult. And so there are prohibitions in both dispensations. Actually, again, we're talking about a transdispensational truth. Anytime you are bound to another who has no intention of fulfilling his duties, it is the unequal yoke situation.